And there you go. And this is north of Boston is happening. And if you're going north of Boston, make sure you stop at Kelly's Roast Beef. It's one of the big favorites on the North Shore. And I want to thank our corporate sponsors, Northmark, U.S. Pavement. Northmark and U.S. Pavement are annual corporate sponsors. Procopio and Northern Bank. And here is our panel. Our moderator, Elizabeth Kroll, EBI Consulting. Mike Procopio, he's the Vice President of Development for the Procopio Companies. Michelle Fitzpatrick from Northern Bank. And Lisa Moroney of Town of Chelmsford. I didn't see Lisa on the network. I wonder if she has signed in yet. Hopefully she has. And that is me. I am Rick Kaplan, and I am the host and producer of all the webinars and the corporate roundtable show, as well as one-on-one interviews. Anyone want any information about any future webinars or one-on-one shows or corporate roundtable, please contact me. I can give you all that information. And here is our South of Boston event, one of the largest events we have every year. Don't miss it. It's 4 weeks, but it is got a ton of information. And I apologize that, I'm promoting a South of Boston on a North of Boston event, but, the next year, hopefully, North of Boston event will be just as large as our South of Boston event.
So I'd love to take a few minutes to introduce our panelists. I know the questions are already starting during the Q&A, so we barely have time to let them tell you who they are, and it sounds like everybody already knows, but just for the sake of protocol here, let's take a quick minute. If we could do some self-introductions. I'm so thrilled to have Mike and Michelle, and I hope Lisa will join us in just a minute. If you could share just a little bit about your roles, your responsibilities, and maybe share some history about what you've been doing over the course of the last year in order to get through the pandemic. Any silver lining you might be able to share, or maybe what you're thinking about as we hope to return back to the office very soon. You want to start, Michelle?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, everybody, for joining this panel. Elizabeth and Mike, I think we're going to have a good conversation today, so I'm excited to talk about all the things that are happening on the North Shore and what we're seeing and what's happened. So my name is Michelle Fitzpatrick. I'm from Northern 1031 Exchange. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Northern Bank, so I actually work for the bank, and I run the 1031 Exchange division. So this has been a crazy year. I've been in banking for 20 years, and this has definitely been an unprecedented year. So from the banking standpoint, we did just our little bank in Woburn, Mass. We did $270 million in PPP loans, which served about 625 businesses throughout both the first and the second draw. It's provided support across about 56 industries, restaurants, landscapers. I mean, you name it, we hit that industry. Over 32,000 jobs and employees were saved because of those PPP loans. And the majority of those clients are in and around Boston and in the North Shore. That's where our footprint is. So it's been a difficult year. We've all been working kind of around the clock to get those loans out the door and get those industries serviced and our clients serviced. So it's been exciting. So I feel like we're kind of hitting the light at the end of the tunnel now that, the spring's here and things have settled down. So it's exciting.
That's excellent. Thank you, Michelle, so much. And Mike, how about you?
Everybody, Mike Procopio. I'm VP of Development at the Procopio Companies. So we're a full service, vertically integrated development and construction firm. We're based in Linfield. We do primarily multifamily and mixed use stuff, a lot of urban infill work north of Boston, primarily North Shore, 128, 495 corridors, some Southern New Hampshire stuff, Portland, Maine market. We do right now we have just shy of 500 million in active construction. It's about 1,500 multifamily and condo units, all north of Boston, and we do roughly 8 or 10 projects a year, different sizes, 30 unit stuff up to like over 300, approaching 400 units at a time, and it's exciting. This conversation is actually super exciting for us because north of Boston has kind of always flown under the radar. Both the urban centers that are north of the city, the gateway cities, and then some of the suburban stuff out on the 128 and 495 belt. So I think this is a really exciting time coming out of the pandemic. We'll talk a little bit about how life science is driving some of this, and that certainly relates to kind of the current environment we find ourselves in. But that's a big driver, and I'm excited to have the conversation today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Mike. And as Rick said, I'm Elizabeth Kroll. I'm with EVI Consulting. We help our real estate clients to assess and mitigate risk in acquisitions, as well as development and redevelopment projects. And we provide a full array of environmental engineering, energy and sustainability, and construction support services. And we are headquartered in Burlington and very committed to the North Shore and, of course, throughout New England and the US as well. But this is home for us, and we're just so delighted to have this time with you. So thank you. So why don't we talk just a little bit, if we could, today our focus is talking about what's driving this transformation. Why is there this explosive growth north of Boston? And just in general parameters, we're defining that as between, say, Route 3 and Route 129, those corridors, and within the 495 belt. Although I love, Mike, we did have a question in the Q&A earlier about what else you're doing on those other, southern New Hampshire, Maine, and everything. So people will be eager to hear about that also. And I guess there's a ripple effect, right? So you can share some of that with us as well. So we're seeing this rapid growth. We're seeing this demand for multifamily, as well as the biotech and lab space that you touched on, Mike. So, in this outer urban, exurban, we might call it, and even some suburban setting, what is it that's providing this drive? And, maybe we can talk a little bit about connectivity, affordability, some of the things that are helping people maybe to mitigate some of the costs of living within Boston, but still having the amenities and the conveniences and the quality of life that people are seeking. And so, Mike, maybe you could share, your own company has tripled in size this year. Michelle, you shared all the great things that are happening. Your clients looking to place their 1031 exchange and the great investment opportunities, rapidly deploying that capital. What are some of the commonalities, perhaps, or, what are some of the drivers that you see that move this explosive growth? Mike, maybe you could start giving us a little context for that.
Yeah, so for us, we see a couple of big drivers north of the city. We always laugh about the North Shore people and the South Shore people, right? And they never meet, right? And for me, going to Quincy is like I might as well be going to Wisconsin, right? It's and then the people south, they just don't come north. But I think there's a couple of factors you really hit on. So affordability, it's not that it's any more affordable than other places, but it is more affordable under normal terms than Boston. So for rent relief and lifestyle, it's become pretty prohibitive to commute south. You have to get well beyond Quincy to have any sort of real affordability. Metro West, you have to get out beyond those kind of affluent Metro West suburbs to get any sort of affordability. So the natural push is going to be north. The other thing that the North Shore has, in particular with some of the gateway cities, is these real city centers, these real downtowns, whether it's Lynn or Beverly or Haverhill. These are already like established food and dining, hospitality scenes, nightlife. I think that's very attractive and very unique to some of these communities pushing up the North Shore. And the other piece that you hit on is just the job migration in two areas we think has really driven a desirability for north of Boston. So two big factors there. A shift in Boston we've seen where office development and commercial development has shifted from kind of Back Bay and the Seaport. That's shifted to North Station. You see that with Hub on Causeway, you see that with Verizon, you see that with State Street, you see that with Rapid 7, you see that with all that development that's happening in that area. The natural commuting location for that is north, right? They're literally going to walk downstairs to North Station, get on the commuter rail or the Blue Line and go north. That's really, I think, driving a ton of the desirability in the Everett, Chelsea, Malden, Revere, Lynn, Beverly, Salem, even pushing out to Haverhill, Lowell. That's really easy commuting from North Station. And I think you see that shift in Boston driving that. And then the life science, move from Cambridge out into the suburban ring, Waltham, Lexington, Bedford, Burlington, Andover, Wilmington, Woburn. That has shifted, you know, the desirability and the demand on the 93 and 495 corridors. And I think you see just this really crazy pent up demand for multifamily. And it feeds into what Michelle's talking about. There's a ton of 1031 money it has to go someplace, right? There's triggers, there's clocks, there's timelines on that stuff. And multifamily, you know, is the primary thing that we see guys looking at right now. I mean, there's certainly life science and storage and stuff like that that's booming, but a lot of that 1031 money is multifamily, and it drives this kind of development cycle.
It is. That's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing everybody moving into multifamily and expanding those spaces.
Michelle, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is it driven by the timing, right? What are some of the factors that encourage that investment?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a so 1031 exchange, you really only have 45 days from the time that you sell your property. The IRS is very stringent on the rules. So you have 45 days to identify a property that you want to replace, and you only have 180 days to close. So when you're doing something on a commercial scale that's a lot larger, sometimes the due diligence takes a whole lot longer than that. I mean, you being in EBI, you know that there's a time period there. So multifamily is a great option for those exchanges, and they're offering a cap rate for people that are attractive. So it's just a logical solution, and that's what we do a lot of.
Yeah, and that 1031 money, when it gets, for lack of a better term, when it gets jammed up towards the end of its timelines, they're willing to compromise and to some degree overpay, depress the cap rates, because the alternative is a tax situation that they don't want. So
That's
they'll
exactly
overpay
right.
in the short term. I mean, one of the best things that we as a developer want when we're exiting a transaction is we want a bunch of guys that are jammed up on their 1031
Yes.
deadlines, because we know we'll get a great exit because they have to put the money on the street, or they've got much bigger problems than whether they overpay by $1 million, right? So
That's exactly
that's
correct.
a real factor with why this is kind of a continuous cycle.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And honestly, we've seen since just, you know, if I'm looking at Q1 from last year, this time to Q1 this year, we're up to like 25% in exchanges. I mean, it's significant. It's significant. And we still have another week or two left in the, well, maybe not, but we have another week left in the quarter. So, I mean, for us to be up that high as of a week ago, it's pretty significant.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I'd love to introduce Lisa Moroney. Lisa, I'm so delighted you're here with us. Lisa's from the town of Chelmsford, Director of Business Development and responsible for Crossroads at Route 129. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, Lisa?
Sure. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm sorry for my technical difficulties. I appreciate that. My name is Lisa Moroney, Director of Business Development, and my primary goal here, participating in the North of Boston event, is to promote the Chelmsford Crossroads at Route 129. We have been working through many layers of business attraction, and I'm happy to be connected with my colleagues here at this event because I'm already learning so much. It helps to explain a little bit about my empty space and how best to promote that with what Michael's been saying a little bit. So our layers here, we have office buildings that are available when Kronos vacated, Mercury Systems vacated. They seem to come into Chelmsford and outgrow their space, leave the nest, and now here we are with you know, some opportunities for more development. And I know that we get sought after for housing, and we've been bringing in market rate housing, but sometimes, you know, it's that dollar, you know, the balance of reconstruction or scraping the buildings, new construction, retrofitting, things like that. But most of my work here has been to create awareness of this space, what we want to be known for in this area of Route 129. We do have many advanced technology buildings in robotics, communications, Brooks Automation. We have the headquarters for Zoll Medical here. We are very much on our way with Thermo Fisher Scientific, fitting out life science space. We're working with Triton Systems on life science space. We've elevated our biotech rating to the highest possible of platinum status. We're really trying to create some advocacy of what Chelmsford has to offer. Creating site tours, welcoming everyone to come see what's available here, and connecting with partners like we are here on this call today.
That's excellent, Lisa. And can you just define just a little bit more about the bio-ready and the platinum status for our audience, so that's a little more detail on that, please?
Sure, absolutely. So platinum status, there are 9% of the state is platinum community ready, bio-ready. And what that means is, along with achieving all the prior levels of infrastructure, public services on infrastructure, municipal team ready for permitting and approvals coming in. We have to abide by the National Institute of Health guidelines for RDNA. First responders have to be skilled in hazmat response on all those bio levels 1 through 4. We have existing life science companies operating in our town, as I mentioned. And also we have available space, more than 20,000 square feet, that's ready and suited for life science expansion. So that's pretty much the bulk of how you reach the platinum status. You have to work closely with your Board of Health and your municipal team. And this works with the Agency of Mass Biotech Council, which is different than the Mass Life Science Center. They have very different functions, but they kind of work in tandem in supporting each other. And some of this helps to build those relationships and those future connections for welcoming biotech into your community as you reach out and work with this team and these agencies. The businesses want to go where they're welcome and the community's ready to streamline that process to get them in and operating quickly.
That's excellent, Lisa. Thank you for that great detail. And the key words that I take away from that are streamlined permitting. So I bet a lot of people perked up at that, right? Mike,
Yeah.
maybe you can talk a little bit about how important that is in your development projects.
Sure, absolutely. My municipalities, as well as many others, we have a technical review process, whereas when the site finding process is underway, we welcome in a group meeting at the department head level so that we can exchange feedback on any areas that may have additional need for work or other areas that are, automatic, welcoming type of thing. It's an exchange of a dialogue to preview projects coming in so that the first time seeing the project is not at the permitting approval request and in that process. For those businesses to understand our meeting schedule, public hearings, all of that is well set in advance for project planning purposes. And so it seems to work very smoothly. And typically our inspectors and, approval layers are very fast response. They're held to timeline. There's no delays, either it's yes or no or why, so that those issues can be addressed and move forward very quickly.
So that's actually a really interesting point, because one of the things I don't think it's unique to north of Boston, but one of the things that you see really clearly north of Boston is really stark differences in abilities of communities to permit things. You have a lot of, especially when you come out to the North Shore side of, the coastal side, a lot of very affluent, let's call them single family based communities where they're very resistant to, they're not going to want lab development. They're not going to want storage development. They're not going to want multifamily development. They're very resistant. The places that have shined are the places that have streamlined the permitting, streamlined the zoning, streamlined the approvals process, and kind of opened their arms. The Lynn's, the Beverleys, the Haverhills, the Lowells, they fall into these buckets of the gateway cities. But the reality is there's a lot of these smaller communities too, whether it's Wilmington or Billerica or Waltham, Woburn, kind of all of these, when they kind of make that leap and decide to streamline that process and kind of embrace good development, you start to see the communities really just take off. And I think you'll continue to kind of see that difference north of the city it's very stark in a lot of ways more than you see it in other areas of the state.
And thank you for mentioning that, Michael, because it seems that it's the misperception that because you have that biotech, it's an automatic yes stamp. It's still the same approval for the planning board. It's not that anything's forced change through the rest of the approval process. There's still control over that. It's just, that outward message, as you're saying, that we're interested to work with biotech. We want the high-paying jobs. We want those types of credible companies coming in. So I appreciate hearing that feedback from you.
And the other piece of that, not to go down the rabbit holes, but the other piece of that, you know, that's important is the abilities of the municipalities to use kind of the rest of the tools in the toolbox that the state gives and local government gives in terms of tax agreements, tie agreements, HDIPs, TIFs, kind of what do these look like? What do the tax credit packages look like? Those can be seriously impactful when you're talking about development. They can make or break the development. So, I mean, there's a lot of communities that are just either they don't understand them or they're just resistant to them from a political perspective. But the communities that are seeing success are the communities that have kind of embraced that whole toolbox and kind of have this open conversation with the development teams and say, look, these are the tools at our disposal. What can we use to make this a reality in a way that's good for the community and for the developer?
Mm-hmm. And I believe the workforce, you know, a certain percent of that workforce that's supporting biotech is coming out of the Chelmsford, Westford, you know, Lowell area and driving into Boston. So now we're getting looked at more by some of those Cambridge companies that are looking, you know, cheaper space, more accessible, things like that. We're getting some renewed interest.
That's exactly right. When these companies started pushing out of Cambridge and Watertown, they pushed west to Waltham, and then they just ran up that corridor.
Yep.
They were all worried about it, right? Like they were all hesitant, like, well, we can't leave Cambridge, right? This is the innovation hub. This is where all the brain trust is. And what they learned as they pushed out is that actually wasn't where the brain trust was. Their brain trust was commuting in there 2 hours every day. And they love the lifestyle of living out in the suburbs and being able to work in Andover or work in a Chelmsford or work in, you know, Bedford or Burlington, right? That's a whole different world than commuting into Cambridge and Watertown and Boston. And I think what they discovered, it's evident from the data and the migration outward from the city is that their employees actually like that.
Yes.
And I think it's totally shifted that kind of housing dynamic out there, both in the single family market, the multifamily market, the condos, as well as kind of the commercial lab flex tech space. Because, you know, we're talking a lot about life science. That's the big driver, I think. Yes. Tech, it's happening equally with tech. If you look at, you know, the moves Oracle's made and Amazon's made and Microsoft has made and TripAdvisor and kind of all these other players that are out on that same belt. It's very impactful. I think people are embracing that suburban work live model.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. Chelmsford, we've got robotics, we've got, you know, communications, all of that. It's just, we're not known for that. And I think with this effort of the Chelmsford Crossroads, the goal is to create, you know, that advocacy and that awareness that we do have global headquarters sited here in Chelmsford for many advanced technology companies.
Excellent. This is terrific. Thank you all so much. Michelle, can we pivot to you a little bit? I'd love to talk about, you know, spaces are being repurposed. How are people using the stimulus funding that's available, right? You've talked about the volume of funding that you've made available. Where is it getting deployed? You know, what's happening in terms of revitalization and putting those dollars to work?
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen a lot of it, the PPP loans went specifically to preserve the employees and the payroll. So that was really the purpose of that. We have a nice little niche in restaurants as well. So really keeping those alive, and we have some developments that are going on. And so it was a lot to do with keeping the payroll going, to keep those restaurants opened. I think we'll continue to see an uptick in exchanges. And I think that's going to play a vital role. I think now that schools are starting to get back into session and people are starting to get back into their new normal, I think businesses are going to reevaluate their need for space and start to repurpose some of those underutilized spaces, some of those offices and some of those maybe retail spaces that, you know, may not serve their purpose anymore. And I think that's where the life sciences are going to come in and the lab development, because people are going to start changing those spaces over. And I think that's what we're seeing now. You know, those offices are being underutilized. People are working from home a little bit more, or being able to downsize a little bit in the office spaces. So I'm sure that's what's going to end up happening.
Do you see that as well?
I have a question. So we've talked a lot about how much the exchanges drive real estate, and they're a huge factor, right? Mm-hmm. Do you see any risk, or kind of what's the bank's kind of position or the industry's kind of view of the risk to significant changes to the 1031 program or
Yeah.
or it even going away. I think from a real estate perspective, there's two big things that it's obviously not to go political, but it's obviously a marked change in tone relative
Yes.
to like long-term capital gains rates, which are super important in real estate, and 1031s. So what's the view on that? Do you see significant risk there, or is it a lot of smoke and no fire?
Well, that's a really good question. So 1031 exchange has been in the tax code since 1921. So it's literally been a part of the tax code since almost the inception. It was incepted in, the tax code was incepted in 1918. 3 years later, they saw the need for 1031 exchange, and it's been in the tax code. It is always on the chopping block. Every time a new administration comes in, they want to make sure that they can show that they can save taxes and they can raise revenue and income, and 1031 seems to be that focal point because there's a big chunk of money there. But the reality is that, you know, it's like kind of off your nose to spite your face a little bit, or they're gonna take something away that's literally driving the economy. It's driving the real estate market. It's driving everything that kind of goes around in the real estate market. Actually, I just put an article in the NEREJ that posted today, and it's about saving 1031. So we have the Federation of Exchange Accommodators is a national organization. They partnered with the National Association of Realtors. They developed a pact, and they've been literally lobbying this since, I mean, they started lobbying it back in 2015 with the initial tax reform, and that happened in 2017 where they took personal property. So it was a significant change in the 2017 tax reform, but at that point, they realized that taking the real estate out would be catastrophic. So we're hoping that we're doing our job. We're hoping that our lobbying efforts are being heard and that they're working. So, you know, once
It would be pulling the emergency brake.
It's what?
It would be like pulling the emergency brake.
It's crazy. I mean, and when we literally had these studies done by some Harvard professors. I know Petrova, it's like Lee and Petrova. They've done extensive studies on what would happen if 1031 exchange was pulled and not available. And, you know, they would save, I think it showed that we would save like $40 billion in taxes, but it would cost the economy almost $400 billion in revenue. So, I mean, just think about it. Every time you do an exchange, how many people are involved in these transactions? I mean, we're employing attorneys, banks, we're employing environmental inspectors, appraisers, contractors, developers, I mean, realtors, I mean, the list goes on and on and on for every single transaction. And the reality is that with 1031 exchange, there's always at least two transactions. So those are all that are going into the economy. So to say that we're going to save $40 billion or whatever that number is in taxes is just craziness. So we're hopeful is the key. So, and we're thinking that maybe August is going to be the time frame that we'll know.
That's good to know.
Yeah, that's what our lobbyist is telling us. So once we get through the pandemic recovery and things start to get back to normal, the tax reform is going to be looking at. But we're hoping that, you know, most of these lawmakers are real estate holders as well. So we're hoping that they see the light.
So should we maybe pivot and talk a little bit about what we see for the economic recovery and how 1031 can aid in that post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I mean, just like I was saying, I think that there's so many components. People just think about the tax savings, and there are so many components to 1031 exchange, and there are so many people that are employed because exchange is available, and it does encourage people to repurpose their property. The reality is that people won't sell their property if they're going to have a taxable gain. They just won't do it. It's just not advantageous to them. If you have a property that you've held for 10 years and now it's worth double, they're not going to spend, it's going to be 30% if they have to pay capital gains taxes. So they'll just hold on to it. And I think it would halt all the development that Mike's doing. It would halt all of the people that are moving properties around. So it is going to be a key component in the pandemic recovery, I think.
You want to talk about that, Mike? Right? You need to be able to aggregate parcels in order to do a new development. So do you see this impacting your ability to access tracts of land?
Yeah, I think overall it'll just reduce the number of trades, right? So it'll push pricing, because the stuff that's going to trade is going to be more expensive. It'll increase the cost of developments, and I think it to Michelle's point, it incentivizes a hold for the cash flow, not a sale. And ultimately, for a lot of properties, that'll reduce the quality of the property, right?
Yes.
A property that's being held for a long-term, cash flowing, very stable, eventually over time goes from being a Class A plus property to being a Class B property, then a Class C property. That's what happens with a hold as they age. When you're constantly able to sell them, they get kind of sucked up into this value add process where your Class A property became a B, and then you sold it, and that person, put a bunch of money into it and upgraded it again, and then 5 years later it repeats the process. And it actually creates really nice housing stock across the board. What you would see is exactly what happened when rent control was big in like the 70s, and you saw like massive declines in the quality of the housing stock.
Yes.
I think that's one factor. And I think just in general, the housing market below the institutional level, so everything below 150 units in terms of multifamily housing, the lifeblood of that is 1031 money. I mean, it's high net worth people that are driving that. Once you get into the institutional level, that's different. That's private equity and it's things like that. But it's super important coming out the other end of this. I think we can't understate those two factors. What happens with long-term capital gains rate? There's a lot of talk about taking those basically to the ordinary income rates. And then what happens with the 1031s? I agree with Michelle. I'm hopeful that, calmer heads will prevail. There's a lot of money tied up in the economy here. And I think overall, we're really positioned, and our view is that we're really well positioned as an industry coming out of COVID, right? So the recovery by all accounts is ahead of schedule. The vaccines are ahead of schedule, and knock on wood, anything can happen. But I think you talk to most people in my industry, in my position, you talk to most of the economists related to our industry, we see a kind of explosive growth coming out the other side of this. So we'd be hesitant to do anything that would tamper with that. Probably not the time to make major policy changes around a lot of these things.
Yes.
Some of the broader points about some of the industries that have been super impacted, whether it's hospitality or food and beverage or hotels, office space right now, very disrupted. You have to let those settle out. You have to let them stabilize. We can't be making policy changes in August or October to these industries that have basically been treading water, trying to stay alive for the past 15 months. It's very difficult.
And we hope that the PPP stimulus did exactly that, right? Help them to tread water in the interim.
Yeah, it has. I mean, we could say that it has. I mean, we've seen that with our commercial tenants. We don't have a lot. We do commercial stuff when it's associated with a residential project, so mixed use, ground level retail in the urban environments, things like that. We've seen the PPP be super impactful in terms of their ability to maintain at least the status quo and have some semblance of survival. I think that group it's going to break coming out the other end. The ones that are really well positioned and have survived really well are going to take ground. You're going to see expansion in the restaurant space. You're going to see kind of a resurgence in that retail space, kind of by separating out the weaker players. Unfortunately, I think that's what the pandemic really did. It thinned the herd, and the survivors have survived and the others haven't. And I think we'll see a bit of a different take on that coming out the other side, but I do think it comes back really strong.
I mean, you can see it now too. If you're going out and about, restaurants are getting busy and busier than like normal. And I think people are going to get out of this pandemic and never look back, never want to cook another meal in their kitchen, never I want to go to a restaurant and never ever come home and eat another meal at home, in a box, in a takeout bag, anything. So I think that once we get out of this and we see these vaccinations happening, I think people are going to really start spending again, and spending in a different way, in a bigger way than they had in the past. So, but Mike, I love your point about kind of going back a little bit about the housing and how the available housing, the quality of the available housing with having 1031 exchange you are spot on. I mean, literally every single person that we do an exchange for, if they're getting into any sort of like multifamily housing or any sort of residential housing, the first thing that they do is renovate. I mean, we do more and more improvement exchanges where people are buying a depressed property and doing improvement exchanges. Our improvement exchanges, I know I said our exchanges were up 25%. Our improvement exchanges are up probably just that much as well. I mean, a lot of people are buying these depressed properties, and literally the first thing that they're doing is they're reinvesting some properties, reinvesting some income into that and bringing them up to really, really nice high-end units.
Yeah, because the goal is forward looking, right? I mean, that would be a shift in strategy if that tax treatment were to go away. You'd no longer be pushing to a sale because, like you said, they wouldn't sell. It's generational. They would
Right.
hold.
I had a 2-family house for 20 years. I didn't do a damn thing to it. The minute I sold it, the guy literally came in, gutted it, and renovated it. I mean, if you own it for 20 years and your mortgage is paid off, why are you going to put any money into it? You're not. Landlords don't. You want the cash cow until you absolutely have to do something.
That's excellent. Lisa, is there anything else that you might want to share about how you're seeing the PPP funding impact Chelmsford?
Well, and that's more directed towards my small business community. They are all struggling equally. It's a really tough time, and we thought once we survive 2020, but it's the lingering effects. And as Michelle said, I think 2021, I'm trying to stay very optimistic, but some of my businesses couldn't get through the PPP process. We're still waiting to kind of see who is going to survive, survival of the fittest here. It's just really tough because the little businesses are not so comfortable with government programs and documentation and all of that required through the process, and some of them just couldn't get through it, and we're really trying to help each and every one of them. But PPP saved a lot, but many others just couldn't conform to the requirements, and we're looking at the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loan, and all the other programs that were put out. Thankfully, something for everyone in some regard to help the smaller business community in terms of maintaining payroll and keeping staff hanging on until we can get through this pandemic and just get through the full reopening of the economy.
It's too bad to hear, because I feel like from a bank standpoint, we try so hard to get the money out, and it was a very complicated process. And I tell you, the bank, we were literally, our loan staff was working all weekends, Saturday nights, Sunday nights, like round the clock to get these PPP loans in the systems in place where they were cumbersome. So it's unfortunate to hear that so many people didn't survive the pandemic and couldn't get their hands on that money.
Some of them are still,
the bankers were working hard, that's for sure.
Yes.
We were doing a bunch of acquisitions and a bunch of refinances through this, and it took timeline. It like doubled and tripled closing timelines because everyone was working on PPP stuff. All like our senior lenders, everybody was working 24 hours, and they were just like, "Look, we can't get to your stuff. We'll get to it later."
Know.
And yeah, it's disappointing to hear that some of these small and micro businesses just couldn't get through the process.
And those are the driving force of the downtowns, those driving forces of your Main Street. And that's what's unfortunate about it, because it's the Main Street businesses that are important in those communities.
So true. From what we see, a large majority of them have survived. Everyone was caught off guard by this. No one was prepared. And some of the smaller businesses, they were still trying to get their tax filing done by March and February of last year. And then that really complicated the application process for loans and dealing with the government, and delayed, all of it. Very, very difficult, but I feel optimistic on this year coming forward, and just really trying to be readily available to all size businesses in my community.
Well, we have a northern, and we have a branch in the Chelmsford, town of Chelmsford. So you know, we're there to service that town as well.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about, Mike, how you go about site selection. And you mentioned, you know, you have some key data points that you track, and, you know, some of the things you worry about are walkability and that Main Street accessibility. Can you share a little bit about, you know, what the lifestyle looks like for workforce housing of the future?
Yeah, so it depends on what the kind of model of the development is. So it would differ between the real suburban stuff and the kind of urban infill that we've become known for. But if you come up through the gateway cities, we're doing a lot of work in, you know, Lynn, Beverly, Salem, Haverhill, Winthrop, kind of that corridor, Wilmington. We like to follow the commuter rail. We don't think transit's dead. We think it comes back as strong as it was. We kind of view this as a moment in time, pandemic wise. So we like this stuff that's clustered around the commuter rail. We like walkability. We really find the real downtowns very, very attractive. So every community has a quote unquote downtown, but there's some that have real walkability, right? You can walk to the grocery store. You can walk to the doctor's office. You can walk to the train station. There's a restaurant scene that's more than, you know, fast food or super fast casual. There's kind of that mix of restaurants, you know, and what we find in like the Lynns, the Beverlys, the Salems is they not only have those downtowns with the restaurant scene, with the nightlife, with the accessibility and the transit, they also have the coast, and you can walk to the beach, and you can walk to the marinas, and you can walk to the boardwalks. And we see people that want to shift out of Boston or shift out of real suburban settings and want an urban life, but aren't ready to say, you know, I'm going to buy a condo in the Seaport, or I'm going to buy a condo in South Boston. That's a different stretch than saying, look, I'm going to live in downtown Salem, or I'm going to live in downtown Beverly, and have all these things that come with the urban lifestyle. So that's really important for us. We like to check that. We're pretty impressed overall with the growth of the state community college and university system. So we've got stuff clustered up in Lynn around North Shore, a relatively rapidly expanding community college system. We really like the Beverly, Salem markets and the growth at which Salem State is expanding, and kind of the, you know, not inherent student housing, but potentially some of the co-living applications there, and kind of housing that's a little bit more structured for that type of environment. Either undergrad, graduate students, or kind of the very early stage young professionals. So those are some of the kind of things that we track. We look at ridership on the T a lot. We look at walk scores. We look at kind of, you know, the way the communities are building out the community infrastructure around there, right? You know, our communities doing the bike share programs and the scooter share programs and car share, and, you know, giving you credit for that kind of stuff. What does that look like in terms of a community? And we've seen a lot of success with those kind of urban infill developments like that.
Mike, would also that include suburban empty nesters who are looking to downsize?
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw a huge stretch, interestingly, through like 2018 and 19 of people, affluent suburban dwellers, lifelong suburban dwellers, like people that had lived in like the Linfields and the Welsleys and, you know, Sudbury their whole life, selling the house that had been paid off. The kids were out of the house, selling the house and moving into the Seaport, moving into Boston, moving into South Boston, right? And that trend is the same when you get out into these other gateway cities. There's this increased pre-pandemic, and I think it will pick up on the back end. There's this increased desirability for urban living and the convenience that has. Those inherent community amenities, right? If you live in a truly suburban area, you got to get in the car to do everything. Get in the car to go get your groceries. Get in the car to go to dinner. Get in the car to go grab a drink. Whatever that looks like, we definitely see an increased shift towards that urban living. And I think while that pulled back a little bit in the pandemic, you know, Boston, you know, multifamily assets really took it hard. That would include the Reveres and the Lynns. Those perform like Boston. That's not the suburbs. They were really hit hard in COVID, but once you get out of that into Beverly and Salem and North and West, out on the 128 belt, the 93 submarket performed amazingly through COVID. Like from Wilmington up through Andover and even into southern New Hampshire, the stuff at Tuscan Village really, really good performance. And a lot of that is driven by the downsizing baby boomers.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. That's a really good point, because we see that a lot too. And although you can't exchange those primary residences, those are all the people that own the multifamilies. So we see it so much that people they're downsizing. They don't want that big house. They want something that they can have, you know, doing that 6 months in Florida, 6 months in Boston, yep, or in an urban area, that they can not have to worry about having 2 cars. And we see that all the time too. So I think that's a really, really good point, Mike.
It was interesting too, Mike, that you mentioned the accessibility to medical care. I can see how that would be a priority for that population as well.
Yeah, yeah. We're looking at mixed use. We're looking at mixed use projects in some of these more suburban areas where we're, instead of trying to always chase like the restaurant users and the cafe users, which has traditionally been like what us housing guys will go after because it's so convenient. We like that. But we think there's a play in some of these smaller suburban kind of village centers to chase after, you know, your small town dentist's office, your small town lawyer's office, your small town doctor's office, get them in some of those. And now you've started to, you know, it's not a master plan community, but you've started to bring some of those everyday uses, especially for that demographic, into their local orbit, where they can just walk to it.
Well, I know in terms of that audience, you know, Chelmsford was recently designated as age-friendly community. And I think some of what Michael's talking about is what spurred that designation, you know, age-friendly. A lot of communities are going through that process as part of welcoming those baby boomers or semi-retired people that are looking for posh housing, but wanting to stay local to family and familiar surroundings. And that's a little bit of how Chelmsford pivoted on their age-friendly status, which really involves the whole community and kind of rallies up the, you know, the residents, constituents, and many other layers of your municipality to get involved in what ends up being the cycle of the economy, you know, housing, transportation, walkability, things like that.
It's huge. So in the cycle of the economy, you hit the nail on the head, because that's exactly what happens. If you think about the amount of wealth that is, trapped's the wrong word, but is held in people's homes. Okay. So you take someone whose kids have gone off to college or are starting their careers, they're in their early 60s, they sell a house. The real estate market has been kind to everyone over the past 2 decades for the most part. If you made it through the kind of 2007, 2008 thing, they're selling houses that are selling for $800,000 or $1 million. The houses are paid off. They're going to rent for $3,000 a month. And the rest of that disposable income is in play in the economy. They're eating out more often. They're shopping local more often. We see it. It's a cycle. Our Beverly project is all people that are selling their houses and moving there for convenience. And they go to Florida for 4 months in the winter, and they keep the apartment. And they pay someone to come clean it and make sure everything's good. But that money is now out in the economy, and it starts to revitalize some of these. You know, I work a lot in the gateway cities, right? So a lot of these were kind of ignored from an economic perspective, and you start to see those dollars outflowing, and now you see the whole economic development of these areas, and you really get that rising tide is lifting everyone now, because that money's in play, not trapped in somebody's single family house, which there's nothing wrong with that, but we see a clear trend there.
Yeah, such a good point, Mike.
And Mike, can you just elaborate a little further on that? What maybe the residential amenities might look like? So for example, in Beverly, where you're attracting a different population than say you might be working, you know, workforce housing might be attracting, you know, related to design, programming, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so we call it the Amenity Wars. It's real. And we blame large student housing developers for the amenity wars that we have, because these kids go to college, no joke. I mean, I went to Salem State, so we had no amenities. But these kids go to college, they go to these big schools, Texas, Ole Miss. They live in what is essentially the Ritz-Carlton on campus. They have water slides, they have lazy rivers, they have golf simulators. All of these things are there. It's shocking, actually. And then they move out and they're hit with this rude awakening of what a real life apartment is when you've got your job and you're making money right out of college, right? But that's what drives, we think that's really what drives a lot of these amenities. So what we've seen is historically we've built the amenities around young professionals. That's been the demographic, right? That's been the renter demographic. And so those amenities were, you know, the wine bar room or the club room and the fitness room and kind of all those check the box things, the pool. As we've seen a shift to an older demographic, a downsizing boomer play, and midlife professionals that are choosing to rent, we've seen a shift in the amenities. So now we're doing more passive spaces, more like golf simulators, tennis simulators, outdoor recreation, a lot more focus on kind of what's the patio like, what's the furniture like, what's the fire pit like, is there maybe there's a, you know, really upgraded grill station, whereas the young professionals just want to cook a burger, or they don't even, they order takeout. You know, that demographic wants a nice cooking station or a pizza oven and kind of all of those things. So it's shifted how we look at it based on what the project is. The other big shift we've seen is that amenities used to only be found in the super institutional product. You needed to live in a building with 200 units to have all these amenities. Now we're seeing that. Beverly's a great example. We have 62 units in that building. Wilmington, we have a project with 49 units in it, heavily amenitized. Club rooms, fitness rooms, wine bar, you know, all of these kind of things that go with that. Co-working space, lounge space, all of those things are being brought at a smaller scale, but into those much smaller properties, which are inherently going to drive more demand of that boutique size product.
Sold. I'm selling my house.
I know.
I want all the amenities.
It's absolutely wild, the stuff that we put in these buildings. Sometimes we shake my head and just look at it. I'm like, I can't even believe we're doing this. Like,
oh God.
But as I like to tell people, the sizzle sells the steak. So
no
it's all
question.
about the lease. It's all about the lease walk. And then if you're looking down the road, it's all about when Michelle's 1031 people are coming walking through on the sale walk, and you know, your building has a rock climbing wall and the other one doesn't. So
Yeah, that's
suddenly
crazy.
they're in.
That's excellent. Thank you. This has been such a terrific conversation. Rick's been monitoring our questions in the chat, so maybe we can take a few questions from our audience.
Oh, I was supposed to do that?
I'll do it. Let's see what we got here. No problem.
No,
No
I'm
problem. All
I'm
right.
kidding. Actually, you know, I have a question for Mike. You know, you talk about amenities. You're talking about 62 units and 40-something units and having all those amenities. Is that, I would think that would be more attractive than someone seeing interested in a 200 unit property. Is that, you find that?
So here you've hit upon a key thing. So historically, developers all stay away from that smaller product, non-institutional product. It's harder to raise money for. It's just harder to do. And they stay away from it because they think it's less attractive. And what we're finding is it's actually not. People like, and we do both. We do big projects and little projects. What we're finding is exactly what you're saying. People like the boutique size. And especially during the pandemic, you should see the shift in interest from living in a 300 unit building, which actually has 450 residents, 450 bodies in there, and living life with that set of neighbors versus the people that can say, look, I can live in a building that's just as nice and only has 45 units. I have 50 or 60 neighbors. That's where they're going. Yeah, it hit the nail on the head. We're absolutely seeing, and it's unconventional. That is not the conventional view of small multifamily. It's neglected. And we see desirability there big time.
Yeah, because I would think, you know, if nowadays with, you know, you have people coming into apartment complexes, you're going to be living with all types of different people. And if you were living in a single family home and you go into a multifamily property, you probably don't want to live with 200 other families. Or
well, no, they're doing it for convenience. And you know what else we're seeing a huge draw to, and we haven't executed on one of them yet, but you better believe we're looking at them. Single family rental developments. Large developments, single families for rent. Convenience, maintenance, cost, all that stuff you're talking about, but still in a compact single family home. I would predict, you heard it here first, or maybe not. I would predict that over the next 10 years, that is what the number one topic in multifamily housing conversation is single family rental developments.
I'm making a note, Mike. We're going to come back to that.
Come back. Let's
a
come
year
back
from now,
let's
right?
come
When
back
we're
to it.
doing
You know,
north of Boston
and,
in
you know,
person. That's going to be the first point of discussion.
You know, and Mike has hit it on the nose with that, because I think, you know, years ago, people would just buy vehicles. And then the cost of vehicles got so high that the manufacturers had to come up. How can we still keep selling vehicles, you know, keep our manufacturing going? So we'll start leasing them, you know, so they don't pay for the full amount of the vehicle all up front. And it's almost on the same idea, you know, because the cost of properties are going so high, you know. A young family to buy a home is kind of a difficult thing right now. Well, you know, we'll go on to one of the questions that was submitted into Q&A right now. This is mostly for Mike, but Michelle might also have some comments. How are the difficulties to find commercial or retail tenants affecting mixed-use construction projects that were either already permitted when COVID hit or may have stalled in the planning or construction phases? Since it's easy to find housing tenants, are there adjustments being made in the real estate and construction market, or are developers just waiting for local retail economies to stabilize more? And that was sent by an anonymous attendee. So they don't want to know who, they don't want people to know who said that.
I would say it's a mixed bag. So in some areas, we're simply adapting. So generally, when we do commercial and retail as part of a building, I almost underwrite that at $0 because it's just not a moneymaker. It's not a major factor in the development. It's hard to keep tenants in. It's not. So I think for the most part, mixed use guys like me are going to be able to pivot pretty quickly and adapt to what their requirements are to get a tenant in there, right? Okay, maybe you thought you were going to get 25 bucks a foot. Now you're going to get 20 bucks a foot, and you're going to pay a little more in the TI build out costs. The one area where I would say, from that regard, I think we're just moving forward, right? We're dealing with the reality on the ground, and we're going to get the space filled. The one area I would say where we're just waiting, and I think others are going to wait too, is if we had a space that was really marquee space designated for a restaurant or a hospitality use, we're not going to fill it with a bad use. So a good example of that is we've a big building we built in downtown Lynn, 10 stories, high rise, and there's a big sit down restaurant, 160, 180 seat restaurant planned for the part of the first floor. We're not going to put a different tenant in there. We are going to wait. If it takes us 2 years to find the right restaurant, we're going to wait the 2 years. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think the retail over the past 3 or 4 months, I would say, maybe 3 months, the retail and commercial markets, I think, have markedly improved over what they were through the pandemic. And I don't know whether that's relative to PPP and stimulus and grants and stuff like that. I don't have that data, but we see much more interest at much more reasonable terms than we were seeing in October or November of last year.
Perhaps, as Michelle said, we're just all dying to get out and have someone cook for us.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Michelle, did you have something to add to that?
No, I think you said it right. I mean, I think that, you know, there are going to be spaces that are going to be available, and you really do have to wait to put the right tenant in those spots. So if you have the capability of doing that, it's important to.
Okay. Here's another question for Mike. This is sent in by Heidi from Inspired Technology. Are smart home technologies starting to be a must for new buyers in multifamily housing? She loved your article in rebusinessonline.com. Heidi, we don't like to talk about other.
I was going to give Heidi props for pitching another publication.
Yeah, right.
Show.
If I didn't like Heidi so much, I wouldn't have even given out that question.
I feel like since Heidi has inspired technology in her name, she has a horse in this game. I think they are a must. I will be honest with my assessment. They not all are created equal. Some that look great perform horribly. We've had horrible experiences with some pieces of smart technology that are supposed to integrate across the board. It's all about, for us, when we're looking at a new project, they are a must, but they also must be proven. So we are generally pioneers and early adopters of all things in our properties, Smart technology is not one of them. We have pulled back on that. And the reason is when it doesn't work the way it's sold to the tenant, you now have an unhappy tenant. And that panel on their wall or that app on their phone actually just makes their life more difficult. So we do adopt it, and it is a must. It has to be proven technology, right? Whether that's the access control systems, the thermostat control systems, climate control, video intercoms, video connectivity, speaker connectivity, blinds, if you've got mechanical window treatment, stuff like that. We want it to be proven before it goes in, but it is absolutely becoming a must, and it's becoming expected with this demographic. If most of our renters walk in, if they don't see like an Ecobee or a Nest thermostat on the wall, they think they're dealing with a dinosaur right off the bat, like things like that. It must be in place.
I have to tend to agree with you because I live in a gated community, and when the gates have issues with it, everyone is like, especially if they have to leave them open for 2 days because they're not working right. Everyone, like is in a panic mode. Yeah. So I can understand that. Let's see. We'll do a couple more questions. If I can pull them up here. Let's see. This is from Nicole Pratt. Industrial and multifamily seem to be hot everywhere right now. When do you think other areas of the commercial real estate will recover? Well, that's kind of you have to have a crystal ball, I think.
I was going to say I didn't bring my crystal ball.
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone can really answer that, but
I think it's very regionally dependent, right? I mean, industrial is not great everywhere. It's great here right now because of kind of the structure we have and the brain trust that we have here in New England. I think multifamily will remain strong because of demographic issues and demand. I think senior housing, I view that as a separate piece from multifamily and age-restricted stuff. I think that will remain strong. Storage remains strong everywhere, primarily in urban areas. I don't particularly think office is that weak. If we ignore the pandemic, I don't think we're talking about a recovery. I think it comes right back. I don't particularly think we have an issue there. I think hospitality stuff, hotels, heavily restaurant dependent uses, convention venues, I think those will come back. I think those will take the longest to kind of sort out the structural issues in that business. I mean, how quickly are people booking conventions for 100,000 people? It will come back. It has to come back. And I think people have short memories overall, but I think those are what'll trail the longest.
Yeah, and we see now, everyone's starting to look at all the suburbs for redevelopment or industrial or multifamily, all of those things, as opposed to right in the downtown area, which is what you have been saying through this whole webinar. And Lisa, you also see that people are starting to move towards like the Chelmsford area and areas that are not generally right in the mainstream of everything.
Right. Yep, that's what I was saying. We're not really necessarily known as a destination point, but as this economy and real estate market has people thinking more creatively, they're looking in places that they haven't looked before. And I'm hoping that with my effort on the crossroads, everything starts to kind of connect and we continue to fill up existing empty space here.
Okay, I'm going to try to get to two more questions, and then we're coming to the close. Michelle, this is from Kyle Gaffney at CP Management. Michelle, has the growth in 1031s been felt equally in multifamily versus commercial? Are 1031 buyers usually open to both? Why or why not?
That's a good question. So we've seen growth kind of across the board with 1031 exchange. Mostly people are selling off, what we're seeing is mostly people are selling off their multifamilies and their residentials. It's across the board. People are kind of open unless they come into their exchange knowing exactly what they want to purchase. people tend to be open to what's available for replacement properties. So, you know, there are some people that come in selling a multifamily and think that they're going to get back into a multifamily, and a commercial property ends up working better for them. A triple net lease might be a better option, have a better, more attractive cap rate, a little bit less management. Intervention, so that works for them kind of regardless of the grade, regardless of the type.
Okay, I'm going to just go back to one question that we got, and this is from Brett Connolly with, I'm not sure what company he's with, but Brett asks, companies and building owners, managers happy with the cleaning? Oh, that's not the question I was going to ask. I'm sorry. Is there a growth in multifamily market due to the increased level of remote working and people moving to the suburbs? That's from David Kelly from Meridian Associates.
I don't necessarily think it's growth. I do think we saw a temporary shift out of the cities and into suburban assets, for sure. We saw that. You know, the jury's out on whether that remains. I don't think it does, because I don't think human beings change, and I think they crave connection and lifestyle, and I think they're going to want that urban walkability. I don't think it's necessarily growth in the sector, because it's just about where we're going to see the growth. Are we going to see it in suburban assets? Are we going to see it in the cities? I think we're continuing. Well, we do have data that we're continuing to see growth from people downsizing out of homes into a rental lifestyle. That is very, very clear. That has continued. That was started before the pandemic, and that has continued all through the pandemic. And we would expect that to continue. That's a lifestyle thing. Those are people that are choosing to rent for lifestyle.
I know in Chelmsford, when we're working on new construction, housing, market rate housing, it's fully occupied before the construction's even completed. There's a great demand for that modernized, new, amenitized lifestyle. Yeah.
Great.
Well, we have come to the close. This has been fantastic. Lots of great information. I'm now a North Shore believer. I'm going to call my realtor this afternoon. And, you know, I also want to apologize to the people that I offended by saying that I didn't know Kelly's earlier. I want to thank you all. You did a great job. Thank you, Elizabeth, for moderating today. I also want to thank our sponsors, which is Northmark, US Pavement, Procopio, and Northern Bank, which is Northern Bank is Michelle Fitzpatrick and Mike Procopio from Procopio. I want to thank you all. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I hope everyone comes to our South of Boston event, which is 4 weeks that will go on. And we hope to see everyone there as well. And I want to wish everyone a happy, safe day.